everybody, and welcome to another board game review and gameplay demo. Today's is one that I'm really excited about because it's another science-themed game. It is Lab Wars. Before I really get started though, I would like to remind you, if you haven't done so already, to please take a look at all of my various social media pages. I've got Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and my Patreon page where you guys can go and sponsor me. Looking at all of those, you'll get updates, contests, giveaways, all sorts of cool stuff. That said, getting back to Lab Wars, the idea behind this game is everybody is playing as an individual lab, and we're trying to gain the most prestige or impact by publishing papers, books, and earning Nobel Prizes. And the way we do that is we generate data and then we essentially buy them. But we can also go and we can backstab and we can sabotage and steal and all sorts of really nastiness like that. In the end, it's a Tableau building / role picking card game that takes about half an hour to 45 minutes and plays up to 4 people. So it's nice and tightly designed in this case. Now, that said, we're going to get right on into what this game is similar to. As far as what Lab Wars is similar to, there are 3 major ones that I wanted to mention. The first one is Citadels. Citadels is probably the most similar to this because you have the role picking and Tableau building. In this case with Lab Wars, it's a little bit different because everybody's got the same roles, so it's more like Libertalia in that sense, but at the same time you're trying to build up a tableau of cards that represent your particular lab that you're going to be using to generate data and do all this kind of thing. The second one that I wanted to mention is just sort of generalized deck builders, essentially, whether it's Dominion or Thunderstone or Legendary or whatever it happens to be, because a lot of the gameplay in this feels like a deck builder. You have an individual phase where essentially you're going to be effectively tapping all of your lab technologies so that you can generate data, get research points and all that kind of stuff, and you end up having a lot of synergy going on, and you're going to be drawing cards, playing cards, discarding cards, doing all sorts of different stuff like that, and it really feels like a turn with some of those more advanced deck builders. Last but not least, I mentioned the word tapping before, and it does remind me of Magic the Gathering in that sense. In Magic, you tap your various lands, whatever they happen to be, in order to summon monsters and attack and do all that kind of stuff. And in this case, you're kind of doing the same sort of thing, where you tap your individual lab components, and they generate data of all different sorts, and then you convert the data into research points, new cards, actions, all sorts of different stuff like that. So it's relatively similar to Magic in that way. But that said, with knowing the similarities, we're going to jump right on into how to play Lab Wars. Alright everybody, we're all set up and ready to start playing some Lab Wars. In this game we are all playing as individual laboratories who are vying to get the most impact at the end of the game by utilizing our different technologies in order to gain data, which we can then convert into either new data, action cards that can potentially sabotage our opponents, or just get research points which will allow us to purchase these impact producing cards, where we have nurture papers, which are scientific publications, published books, and Nobel Prizes. The end of the game is triggered by 2 out of those 3 piles being empty. After that happens, everybody adds up their total impact points, and whoever has the most wins. To set up the game, everybody starts off with 2 pipettes and a thermocycler already completed that we'll be able to use. We also each start with 2 research points and 3 technology cards that go into our hand to potentially build later on. Each round of the game is split into 2 main phases, a collective phase and an individual phase. During the collective phase, everybody is doing the same thing at the same time, where we're going to be getting new research points, a new card for our hand, readying all of our lab equipment that we had used the round before, and then we'll be picking a character to play. These characters have special abilities that can interact with other players, and sometimes the technology cards we have. After that, we will go through what's called the bonus round, which is related to cards denoted by a large star icon, and then after that we'll be sabotaging other people. During the individual phases, when we'll be generating data through our completed lab technologies, building new lab technologies from our hand, drawing new lab tech cards as well as action cards, and generating research points which can then be traded in either to build new technologies or to gain impact cards. For the collective phase, I wanted to go a little bit more over the character cards and how they interact. Everybody has the same set of character cards to play: a professor, a PhD student, a principal investigator, a professor emeritus, and a postdoc. Each one of these has some bonus ability designated by the large star, and then most of them have some kind of a sabotage ability. Essentially, the way this works is we're all going to have our characters in our hands just like so. We're all going to pick one face down, flip them up, and then we do whatever it is they say. After they're used, they will go to the side, and then we'll be able to reuse them after we play the professor card. The professor's ability is one that allows you to take back all of your utilized character cards and put them back in your character pile, so to speak, or all of the ones that you can use. As far as the bonuses and the sabotages work, for example, we have the postdoc. The postdoc, during the bonus round, which comes before sabotage, you receive a research point for each lab item you have worth exactly 2. The pipettes and the thermocycler that you start with are both worth 2 research points. So in this case, if I played this, I would get 3 research points during the bonus phase. In addition, during the sabotage phase, I can attack or target, so to speak, anybody who played a professor card. For the sabotage, you can only target one person, and a single person can only be targeted 1 time per round. In this case, if somebody plays a professor card, I can take 2 research points from them if I play a postdoc. So that's sort of the interaction amongst the individual character types. Beyond that, we also have other bonus phase cards or phase-related cards. For example, the patent. During each bonus phase, you place 1 research point onto the patent card from the supply, and then at any time you can take it all off and you get rid of the patent. Another example here is the centrifuge. With the centrifuge, when it's in your lab, you can tap it during your individual turn and it will put 2 research points on it, and then during the bonus phase you can take all the research points that are on the centrifuge. So those are just a couple examples of what happens in the bonus phase. After that, we go into the sabotage in turn order. After that, we start up the individual phases. The primary goal for the individual phase is to build up data. Data can then be traded in to get new cards, either the tech cards or the action cards, or you can trade it in for research points. The research points subsequently can be used to build new lab equipment from your hand, or it can be used to purchase these impact papers, books, or Nobel Prizes. There are 2 main types of data in this game: chemical and DNA data. The chemical data is sort of the green circle with the molecule inside, and then the DNA data is designated by a purple circle with a little DNA molecule in it. In general, the chemical data is used to produce research points, and DNA data are used to draw new cards. The way that you designate using your lab equipment is by taking them and turning them horizontal, essentially tapping them like in Magic the Gathering. In this case, I've produced 1 chemical data by tapping my pipette. If I tap another one, now I have 2 pieces of chemical data, which I can use the power of the pipette to trade in for 2 research points that I can then put in my supply. After that, in my hand, let's see, I can go ahead and I can actually build another set of pipettes by paying 2 research points. This is essentially how you build up your lab, and again, at the beginning of the simultaneous phase, everybody gets to draw lab tech cards, so you will never be without new potential cards to build in your lab. During a player's individual phase, they may also play a single action card if they wish to do so. These have numerous effects, including forcing somebody to utilize only a single type of data as opposed to both. You can swap lab items with other people. You can discard an action card that somebody is holding. All sorts of different things. These are pretty nasty. There are a few ways to get them, mostly through the tech cards, and they'll tell you that you can draw an action card. In addition, one thing that's important to note is that your hand limit is always 5 cards. You can only ever have 5 tech cards. The action cards do not count towards that hand limit, but anytime you exceed 5, you must immediately discard however many to go back down to 5. Once you're done with your individual actions, you leave your lab as it is, and then play moves to the next person, and so on and so forth until the round is over. And once again, at the beginning of the round with the simultaneous phase, one of the first things you do is you'll take whatever items you used and untap them so that you can use them for the next round. And again, you keep going like that until 2 out of the 3 piles are gone. That's pretty much it for Lab Wars, so what I'll do now very briefly is talk about the expansion for this game, Legends of Science. The Legends of Science expansion essentially adds more of everything to the game, starting with characters. At the beginning of a Legends of Science game, every player will start with one of these special characters, which are actual scientists such as Rosalind Franklin, Barbara McClintock, Gregor Mendel, and Charles Darwin. Essentially, these give a particular bonus during the bonus phase, some sort of power, and they also cannot be sabotaged, nor can they sabotage anybody else. But they are extremely powerful, and you notice they have these gold backgrounds as the rest of the expansion cards do. The expansion also gives us new lab tech cards, which are specifically associated with the new people. For example, the HMS Beagle associated with Charles Darwin, P plants, Gregor Mendel, and then we've got the Corbin plants for Barbara McClintock, etc., etc. Many of these have a lightning bolt symbol, and essentially what that means is it's an instant action, or it's something that happens instantaneously as soon as the condition is met. For example, the HMS Beagle, once it's in your lab, then whenever a legendary character is played by a competitor, you gain a research point. So if you get that out early, then whenever somebody plays their special card, you would get a research point. We also have new action cards that have been added, and these are essentially even meaner than most of the other ones. They include being able to pay only half for nurture paper, or a lot more sabotage and scooping your opponents and just straight up stealing from them and all sorts of stuff like that. So some really nasty things. Last but not least, we have the news articles. These are a new impact type of card, and the way that these work is at the beginning of the game, every person is given 3 of them, and everybody picks 2 of them to keep. These are specialized impact cards that only you can fulfill. For example, if you draw 10 lab item cards during your individual phase, then you get 4 impact points. So in other words, this will be sitting in my hand. If I manage to do that, then I would say, boom, I did this. And now it's in my pile of impact cards. So it just adds another little dimension or a new individual goal for this particular game. So it's kind of interesting in that way. And like I said, the expansion really opens up a lot more in terms of character interaction and sabotage and things like that, not to mention those interesting instant use type of lab tech cards. But with that, that's it for how to play Lab Wars, or at least the basic one. So with that, I'm going to go right on into my general conclusions as well as pros and cons. Well, like I mentioned, now it's time for pros and cons as well as some general conclusions about this game. First off, going with pros. The first and biggest pro for me is the theme. Obviously, I'm a scientist. I love the science aspect. I love science-themed games. And frankly, there's a lot of like tongue-in-cheek humor for this, kind of similar to like Munchkin or things like that, especially with a lot of the action cards and the sabotages. And you know, you look at some of these and it's just like, oh man, I remember that happened to me, and kind of stuff like that. So it's easier for me to like get my co-workers to play it and things of that nature. One of the other big pros for me personally is the different mechanics that the game utilizes. We've got resource management, we've got a sort of like Tableau building, deck building, synergy type of thing going on, and we also have the strategy behind the role picking and the sabotage, and I really appreciate things like that. Not only the fact that we've got the role picking and the little bit of sabotage and the backstabby type of stuff, that very Euro style gameplay, but also just the strategy of what you're going to play, when you're going to play it, and all of that kind of thing. For cons, there were a few major ones that I wanted to mention. As is tradition with many of these heavily themed games, the theme can be a big con. A lot of people may not be familiar with the science, they might not get the inside jokes, all of that kind of stuff. And it can be a huge turnoff. Very similarly with Munchkin, where it tends to be hit or miss with the players playing it, because mechanically there is a decent amount going on, but it's not so much substance that it's going to keep people beyond the theme. A sort of 2-for-1 con as well is the mechanics of the game. Now, I mentioned I really do enjoy them. I like the tableau building, the role picking, the sabotage, all that kind of stuff. However, that is also a con in 2 ways. The first and main way for me personally is how this portrays science. And I don't want people thinking that this is how science is done and this is how universities and even industry acts. Yes, there are acts of sabotage. Yes, there are bad people in science. Yes, there are desperate people in science who do stuff like this that the game portrays, especially in the action cards. I don't like seeing that in a game, because frankly it's not true, and I don't want people in the general population to think that that is what we as scientists are doing. Now that's a relatively minor point, and I know people will take the game at face value of it's a game, but at the same time potentially I worry about that kind of stuff. On the heels of that, similarly with the other mechanics, is you can have people who just generally don't like the Euro style mechanics. A lot of people don't like the stabby, backstabby nastiness that you can do in this game, and people will deliberately avoid games that do that. I completely understand, and it's more just for your guys' information that it occurs. So if you don't like that kind of thing, then it's probably not going to be the best game for you. But if you enjoy those Euro style backstabby sabotage type things, then it's definitely worth giving a try. Last but not least on my con list is, well, it is something that's relatively minor, and it is sort of the first few rounds in this game especially, you end up with a decent amount of analysis paralysis and sort of just like chugging forward little by little type of thing. During the simultaneous phase, again, everybody is playing at the same time, so it goes relatively smoothly. But then when you hit the individual phase, and essentially it's everybody does their entire turn, then it's the next person do their entire turn, next person. At the beginning, when people really don't know what they're doing, then it can take a while just because they're getting used to it. But then, towards the end of the game, when you have a giant tableau of cards that you're tapping and untapping, it can take a really long time, even though people know how to play it then. So in the rules, it even says that it recommends you shout Eureka at the end of your turn so that you can indicate you're done. And when a game has to do that, then it kind of little bit calls into question exactly how good the game flow can potentially be. But that said, going into my overall conclusions, I personally really enjoy this game. It's right up my alley in terms of the theme with the biology and lab in general, and it's also right up my alley in terms of game styles that I like. It's small, it's relatively quick, it's easy to teach, it's easy to play, and it has a decent mix of mechanics where we've got the role picking, resource management, hand management, all that kind of stuff. So it has a surprising amount of strategic depth, and I personally really enjoy it. But again, if you're not somebody who is all about the sabotage and backstabbing and wants to have something that you built to remain as such, then it might not be the game for you. But otherwise, I highly recommend at least giving Lab Wars a try. With that, thank you very, very much for watching this video, and I will see you next time.